This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State grain economist Daniel O'Brien begins today's show talking about what production estimates have come out for crops, as well as continued volatility in the grain market. The show continues with Gimmie Jo Jansonius, USDA Rural Development State Director of Kansas, discussing rural development in Kansas and a recent grant for rural water infrastructure. Chip Redmond, K-State meteorologist, concludes the show, explaining how parts of Kansas have fire concerns and other parts might need to prepare for flooding. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with a grain market update from K-State grain economist Daniel O'Brien. Daniel, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Shelby.
Daniel, we'll talk about what we saw from the USDA report domestically later on in the show, but for now, what are we seeing for cash and futures?
I would say, as we look at cash and futures right now here, we've just had some markers laid down towards the beginning of this crop production season. And the WSDA report, the first one was the prospective plannings report came out at the end of March, but we really haven't started to see actual production numbers or estimates going forward until the May WSDA report that came out on the 12th that actually starts forecasting both finishes up the old crop marketing year 25-26 for these crops, and then has started in with the first official new crop 26-27 estimates. So that's something important to look at. And here we also have the Kansas Wheat Tour during a time of uncertainty in the market, a lot of concerns about dry conditions and the like, and what that might do for the wheat crop. So we're at a time that bears watching right now, and as we look at our price expectations and actually our marketing strategies going forward. So here with that, closing on yesterday on Thursday the 14th, here you have July corn futures 467 3/4, Dees corn 491 1/4, and those are down 13 and 11 and basically 12 cents from the day prior. So earlier this week we had a lot of volatility up and down on corn futures. Of course, for soybeans, they've also been part of volatility, but both of them pale relative to what's happened in wheat. So we had soybeans close for July soybeans 11.93.5, November 11.84, both not at 11.25 or $11. They're moving towards $12 on some of the risks that we're seeing in uncertainty, and that's with expectations of large acreage and larger crops as well. And then for wheat, any market watchers in our audience have been watching the wheat market. July hard red winter wheat traded on the CME closed at 7.05 1/4. Yesterday on Thursday the 14th had gotten up to about $7.50. A really volatile day. Concerns about weather in the hard red winter wheat areas, a report that came out of Oklahoma, 24 bushels per acre, expected yields far below where they typically are. And that came out a week ago. So here the Kansas Wheat Tour came along and also essentially verified what had been projected by the USDA earlier. The USDA in their May NASS report projected 37 bushels per acre, 214.6 million bushels for the state of Kansas. Wheat Tour came in at 39 bushels per acre, and that with still weather uncertainty to come. So I think probably Chip Redmond in our shop will talk more to that effect as to what weather we might have to finish out this crop year. So that we'll be listening to that for sure. But of course, the big issue that came out as we first mentioned was the WSDA report, World Ag Supply Demand Estimates report, both finishing up the old crop marketing year and starting out the next one. And of course, when you talk about the new crop marketing year, our attention is almost all focused on the production side. And as we're sitting here at with wheat harvest. Net marketing year to close on May 31st, a few days away for wheat, but then the planting going on for the fall harvested crops at this time. So lots going on. That report that was released on Tuesday the 12th showed a USDA projection, basically a trend line yield plus acreage from that earlier prospective plantings report, an estimate on harvested percentage of an estimate of 15.995, just under 16 billion bushels of corn, yields of 183 bushels an acre in any type of a dry weather situation. That 183 could be a pretty heroic estimate, but that's the uncertainty that we'll be dealing with now as we go forth. And there's still the question that's out there, ongoing concerns about whether we actually reach the prospective plantings report estimate for U.S. corn planted acres in 2026. Concerns that high fertilizer prices, other factors could move us away from that. So with that number, then we came out with a corn ending stocks projection off that supply demand balance sheet of below 2 billion bushels at 1.957 billion, actually a little bit above the trade's pre-report estimate of 1.93 billion bushels. So we're off, I guess. Here we go in terms of wondering what the production numbers and ending stocks will be for corn. Similar story for soybeans, projected 4.435 billion bushels for the soybean crop for this year, 53 bushels an acre, record high. Again, at risk, uncertain, but that is the marker that's laid out for us to compare all the information that we get from now on in these coming months to that. Would note that that number with the old crop information we're bringing forward, they projected U.S. ending stocks for the 26-27 marketing year at just above 300 million. So record high yields, strong production, and an ending stocks figure of 310 million bushels, which is compared to this year, that'd be down even from where we're at right now. It was interesting to me, they raised the export numbers for soybeans from 1.53 billion in a current crop 2025-26 marketing year up for next year by 100 million up to 1.63, and also raised crush by 120 million up to 2.75 billion bushels. So, I wouldn't say they're curious moves, but those usage numbers have gone up in some ratio, some relative manner to the increase in production that's estimated. And on the export figure, gosh, you're in league with whatever estimate comes out of that would come out for what we think is going to happen in Brazil and Argentina and elsewhere. And just quickly looking at those, which we'll talk about along with our colleague Guy Allen next week on the international side, there are record top of the reach corn and soybean crops projected for Brazil this year. So again, it's great to be optimistic, but if you ever have a year where you're not optimistic and usage is expanding relative to your expectations, then you could be in line for a lot of volatility. Just something to look at. And then, of course, for the biggest story that's up front for us would be the wheat, U.S. wheat production for this year projected at 1.561 billion bushels, down 424 million from where we're at in this current market year, the one ending on May the 31st, which is just under 2 billion. So, and almost all of that is winter wheat, most of it hard red, some soft red winter wheat, both down enough to change the expectations. The figures for U.S. winter wheat projections were thought to be coming into that report that came out on the 12th to be about 629 million, actually came in from the USDA's figure of 515. So, over 100, about 115, 120 million bushels less. And the Kansas Wheat Tour numbers that just came in right in line with that. So interesting look at that. Soft red was projected 336 million. Production came in at 301. So both hard red and soft red markedly below what, at least with initial with the initial blush of what we've seen from USDA NASS and supported by the Kansas Wheat Tour, coming in markedly lower than we expected. So once we get into June, then as we keep going forward, we'll have a breakout for the hard red and soft red winter wheat supply demand numbers, and we'll get that coming in on the June reports, as I recall. And then we'll be able to survey the damages even that much more readily. Damages in terms of an inability, less ability to meet export demand for those two hard red, soft red and hard red winter wheat categories as we go forward. And surprise, probably the biggest issue in the whole report is that for U.S. wheat, we're projecting $5 wheat for the marketing year ending May 31st. The USDA came out projected $6.50 wheat for the upcoming marketing year. So clearly pricing in scarcity in the export market, at least with the shorter U.S. winter wheat crops. And we'll see where things go from there. So just an interesting time. I would say next week we'll take more time and look through what's happening on the international side, and some real, I wouldn't say head scratchers, but some pretty important issues at play in terms of 2026 projections for world wheat, corn, and soybean ending stocks. Just interesting time in the market. Here we're, I guess if all these numbers met our pre-report expectations, we had no short crops, we'd have pretty low prices. Well, right now we've got a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty, some short crops looking like they're heading our way. And our question is then how to manage the price volatility. And if we're confident for forward pricing, what steps do we take to try to protect ourselves on the financial side? So just interesting times there, Shelby.
Daniel, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much.
That was K-State grain economist Daniel O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing water infrastructure and the USDA Rural Development with USDA Rural Development State Director for Kansas, Gimmie Jo Jansonius. Gimmie Jo, thanks for joining us today.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me, Shelby.
Gimmie Jo, what does USDA Rural Development do?
Well, USDA Rural Development's mission is to help improve economy and quality of life in Kansas. We have more than 70 different programs, and we kind of catch three buckets with that: business programs, community programs, and rural utilities. But I think the best way to describe that is we kind of pick up where our sister organization, the Farm Service Agency, leaves off, and we have all the tools that it takes to build a rural community. And while we have different population thresholds along the way, depending on the program, we kind of tend to focus on rural communities that have populations of 50,000 or less. And it's really, really fun work that we get to do to help stand up rural communities to get the resources and the network and just the things that they need to make progress on the things that are important to them, and have just the resources to build their community out and ensure that they thrive and are strong.
And you mentioned the Farm Service Agency, and there the state director, David Shem, appointed. And is that the same in your case as well?
Yes, I serve at the pleasure of President Trump and Secretary Rollins. I accepted my appointment about a year ago. And so, yes, this is a very, very big honor to serve at their pleasure, and very excited to serve also just the people of Kansas. And such an honor, such a pleasure to just get to do that. Absolutely.
Is this something we really see across the nation of rural development directors, per se, sometimes working together to help solve problems?
Yeah, so across the country, there is a state director in every one of the 50 states that are appointed by the administration to serve in this capacity. We collaborate regularly. We have regional collaborative opportunities just among the appointed state directors, where we talk about the challenges and the opportunities that we face. And I think what's really unique about that is then we're able to bring back potentially 50 different ideas that we may not have had before when we go into a community and they are seeking our perhaps expertise or perspective, or even just resources from our network beyond USDA Rural Development programming when we're taking on a challenge and helping them navigate what's before them.
And Gimmie Jo, as you mentioned, you've been in this role for about a year, and how have you seen it be something important for Kansas?
In fiscal year 25, USDA Rural Development had the opportunity to get $23 billion out the door. And when we do some of these loans, some of these grants, they have the ability to be paired with additional capital, whether it's an applicant contribution, whether it's a local bank guarantee, to really build out projects that move the needle for some of these rural communities. And so it's really exciting to see very important foundational services in a community be able to be sustained through these rural development dollars. And, we're all paying our taxes anyway. Seeing those dollars come back to rural America and be put to good work is just so incredibly rewarding. And I'll also say, we do a lot of work through our business and industry program, and that's probably one of our programs that I absolutely love, because it allows us to partner with local and regional banks to provide an 80% guarantee on a loan that 80% does not count against their local lending limits. So we are getting capital back into that community, circling with local bank dollars, standing up, economic development businesses. I've really had a focus on ag businesses that are ancillary to things that empower farmers and ranchers. And so that's been really exciting. And so to me, it's just anything that stands up a rural community, anything that benefits a farmer and rancher ancillary to ag. We're making Kansas stronger through those dollars. And it's so fun to sit down with a community, hear their heart, know what they're passionate about, and figure out how we all work together and get all of the right stakeholders at the table to build out what they need to make progress. And so I think for me, those are the most rewarding things, is getting all of the puzzle pieces put together. And USDA Rural Development gets to be a piece of that puzzle. We aren't the whole shebang. We just get to be a piece of the puzzle. And to me, that's really exciting work.
In a recent investment or loan involving water infrastructure in rural Kansas, and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that has been some really exciting work for us. Water infrastructure in the state of Kansas, and everywhere I go, I seem to hear about water infrastructure being a challenge for our state. And it does not seem to matter what community you are in. Water infrastructure is a challenge in one form or another. So total, I believe we invested a little over or right at $11 million through our water and wastewater disposal loan and grant program. And I believe we benefited, I think it was 7 communities across the state of Kansas between loan and grant with those dollars. And so anything from, distribution to also storage, wastewater treatment, any of those things, those are going to be investments that the communities then are able to make back into their infrastructure to help just have healthy, productive water systems that ultimately allow us to have healthy, productive citizens. And I just can't help but think that water is the foundation of all of our communities, because we can come in and we can help communities build wonderful hospitals, beautiful schools, great childcare facilities. And I already know, being a Kansan and knowing our people as well as I do, we have the great people to sustain these facilities. But if we don't have the water to back that up, we don't have anything. And so that's why this water piece is so important, and getting those water dollars out the door really matters. And so, it's really interesting too. We just went through mid-year pooling for fiscal year 26. I actually had to send some dollars back because that program was not accessed at the level it probably should have been. And so I think getting the word out to communities that that program exists. I've had some really great conversations here in the last few weeks with my state legislators from across Kansas and some other key stakeholders. And I think we're going to make a really concerted effort to start connecting some additional dots to ensure that communities know that these programs exist. We have some great partners at the Kansas Water Office and KDHE where we're able to layer some capital to make these dollars go even further. But in visiting with my counterparts in the state legislature, I think we want to be really intentional to sit down and have some conversations that allow us to make these dollars go even further. And so I think if we can be intentional with that, we can really start to move the needle on some of these water challenges our communities are facing. And so that's really going to be my goal for the next year, because if we can do that, I think we can start to move the needle on some of these challenges, not just in this first round of communities. I think they set the bar for how that can look, and I think we can really go far if we can just be intentional to bridge that gap between federal and state communication moving forward.
How do communities or people learn about these programs and hopefully get involved in them?
One would be to go to the USDA Rural Development website. A couple of signature programs that I would note would be the water and wastewater program that I just mentioned earlier. The community facilities program is another really great one. Also, just reaching out to me personally as the state director, and we can attach my contact information to this podcast if that would be helpful. I love to get out in communities and just hear their heart. I think I've noticed over the last year, when I get out and I do a full-blown presentation about all these programs, I feel like people's faces glaze over and they're like, well, what? The most effective outreach I feel like I can do is to sit down across the table from a stakeholder, have a cup of coffee with them, and just listen. And I am more effective as a state director when I listen, hear their heart, know what they need, and then be that networker and connector to get them, whether it's a program, a resource. A lot of times it's another person. To me, I take a lot of pride in just being that networker and connector and providing leadership in those situations. Sometimes USDA Rural Development programming isn't the answer. Being the state director of rural development means that we're developing Kansas, and I'm the networker and the connector and the leader that gets to help lead that charge. Our programs are great, don't get me wrong. I really like to talk about rural development programming. I really like to talk about working in an administration where we have the privilege of doing that and having the president be the first one since Bush won to keep rural development in their budget. That excites me. But at the same time, I'm a Kansan at heart and I want to see rural Kansas thrive. And we have to work together to do that. And sometimes there's other programs that are a better fit for a community. And we really have to do what's best for the community and their stakeholders at the end of the day.
That was USDA Rural Development State Director for Kansas, Gimmie Jo Jansonius. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Friday show with a weather update from K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chip, as we look at our previous temperatures for this week, have we finally warmed up a little bit?
Yeah, we have really warmed up. It's hard to believe that we've actually been cooler than normal as of when we record this. Most of the state is still, for May, running about anywhere from 1 to 5 degrees below normal for average temperatures in May. Granted, we're not quite halfway through. And really, when we look statewide, year to date, we're running in the top 5 to top 10 warmest starts to the year for most of the state. And that's pretty impressive considering we're 5 months in now. And, we had to have some cooler weather as well. Unfortunately, we still had some areas of frost again in western Kansas. And I know the wheat tour is out, finding a lot of freeze damage from previous freezes, especially that impactful one there mid-April. And so we have had some cooler weather, but the tables have turned. We're going to see temperatures really escalate here. I expect probably 100 degrees somewhere in the state almost every day from Friday to Saturday, Sunday, maybe even into Monday. So much warmer than normal temperatures. When we look at average high temperatures this time of year, it varies a little bit, but we should see high temperatures in the mid to upper 70s for most of the state for highs, and lows should be still hovering around that 50-degree mark, again, depending on where you're at, but a little bit warmer in the east where we average a little bit higher temperatures, 55 for lows. So those overnight lows are going to stay really warm as well with an increase in moisture. And that's probably the biggest story thus far. Despite, a lot of the state is in drought, we still have 40% in moderate or worse drought in the state. And then we also have a pretty fair chunk. We just added another 3% of the state. 7% of the state now is considered an extreme drought. That area of expansion was right smack in the middle of the state, central Kansas. But the bigger story is we're going to move some moisture into the region. Unfortunately, that moisture is going to be really restricted to the eastern side of the state. And we're going to see dew points get up to the 60-degree mark. And it's going to be that way for about 4 to 5 days. Further west, things still remain dry. We'll see a little bit bigger diurnal trend in those temperatures where they're going to warm up to near 100, and then we're going to cool off. We might cool off still down into the 50s, so closer to normal. But that really dry air is going to be a problem. Western part of the state is going to see rapid drying. 100-degree heat and humidity is potentially as low as single digits on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday is going to dry that vegetation out. It's also going to result in rapid curing of the wheat as well. And that's going to become a problem because we're going to have gusty winds and we're going to have some dry lightning. And we're definitely concerned about fire weather this weekend for Southwest and maybe even portions of the Central, especially that area I mentioned earlier. That's an extreme drought. But the other side of that story is we're going to have multiple rounds, almost daily rounds of thunderstorm complexes that develop off this dry line that's oriented in central Kansas. And we're going to have severe weather threats with that. We're going to see anything from hail to strong winds to even tornadoes, especially through Monday for central eastern Kansas. And so it's peak severe weather season, and it's been rather quiet with this dry air that we've had. But now with the increase in moisture, influx of it, we're definitely going to see an increase in storms. And that will hopefully bring some needed precipitation as well. They're going to be spotty, isolated, which tends to imply that they're more severe. But where storms do persist, and we see a storm almost every day in some places, we will likely see some heavy rain, potentially as much as 2 to 3 inches of rain, if not even more. So there might even be some flooding concerns. The ground's really dried out, and that rapid drying led to the ground really becoming hard. And I've had a lot of conversations with folks that water's not getting into the ground very well. So any rain, especially heavy rain right on the onset of a storm, is going to result in really rapid runoff and not really good infiltration into the ground. But hopefully, after a couple of rounds of precipitation in the east, we can get some of that moisture going into the ground and build that surplus that we need to carry us forward for the next dry spell, which looks like likely to come towards the end of the month into early June.
Chip, I appreciate taking the time to join us today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's what we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.